So the book covers the largely untold story of the Caribbean and West African volunteers who served with the RAF during World War II, operationally in the air over Europe, as well as the almost 6,000 ground crew who came with them and helped to service aircraft and perform a number of other critical roles. And I just felt that it was important to tell this story. The motivation of these West Indian volunteers and West African volunteers is particularly interesting. You have to remember that they'd only been liberated from slavery 100 years, or 101 years before the outbreak of the Second World War. The notion that the Germans could defeat the British, acquire the British colonies, and potentially return black people to slavery was very, very important and very worrying for the entire population. While it wasn't the only motive, I'm sure that excitement and danger and the romance of flying were also very, very important. Now, my uncle became a navigator on bombers, part of Bomber Command, and he served in Halifax aircraft initially and later in the Lancaster. He was the last person you'd picture dropping bombs on anybody. Certainly was not anybody who celebrated the violence of the war. I think he greatly regretted everything that needed to be done. He saw it as a necessary job that had to be done. A man you would be proud to serve with, and certainly a man I'm proud to be related to. Most of the Caribbean aircrew anticipated racism. However, this changed dramatically once he arrived in Canada, and he described his training in Canada as basically being treated just like anybody else. He experienced no racism, felt no sense of racism, passed the course with flying colours, as did many of his colleagues. Arthur Wint among them, the famous Jamaican Olympic medalist, 1948. On arrival in England, he was sent to Yorkshire, and he said, "I will always remember those kind and generous people." He could not go into a pub without being offered a drink. People wanted to know what on earth had motivated him to come all that way from the Caribbean to fight in a war that they thought had nothing to do with him. And they were greatly impressed and very, very kind and friendly. And not surprisingly, he ended up marrying an English nurse that he met on a Transport Command flight in the 1950s. John Blair, my uncle, was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross in 1945 at the very end of the war for his service, and the citation refers to his courage and his commitment and dedication under fire. He completed a full tour over Germany, and of course his tour ran for several months, and so he was exposed to danger and he withstood that and never backed down. I really believe that they wanted to demonstrate that despite hundreds of years of slavery and despite the colour bar that had existed until 1939, 1940 in the RAF, that they could do this and they were as good as anybody else. And if you look at the careers that these men, many of them pursued after the war, becoming ambassadors, judges, senior politicians, in a couple of cases the first prime ministers, very, very progressive, very, very impressive individuals. These were leaders, and the Royal Air Force was an exceptionally forward-thinking, flexible and thoroughly modern organisation that gave them the chance to do that. My uncle admired the British, and in fact I think his sentiments and the sentiments of others are best captured by one of his closest friends, Johnny Banks, who was a navigator in Mosquito fighter bombers, who said that when they heard Churchill on the radio making the speech about fighting on the beaches, they were so deeply moved that they just felt something had to be done. And he said, "I imagined these people on this little island defending themselves against this aggressor, this aggression." And he said, "I never liked a bully, and I felt I had to go and fight."